Good morning, friends. I am so excited for this interview today. This has been a long time coming. We had Officer Gomez coming on such a long time ago, and I was sick and we had to postpone. And so this has been so highly anticipated. This wonderful man you're looking at, he has become a public figure with almost 100,000 parents following him for his incredible insight and wisdom into educating all of us, especially focusing on middle and high schoolers. Officer Gomez, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
I am so blessed to have you here today. And as you know, as you well know, that here at the Real Deal of Parenting, we are no strangers to being extremely forthright in tackling the topics that most other parenting platforms, won't even touch due to being controversial and sensitive. And I feel like that's what you embody and that's what you do too. You tackle these subjects that are so hard for parents to even go there, like mentally go there, right? And that's what you do. And so before Officer Gomez and I went live, I was just going through his Facebook page and it was just, I'm like, every parent needs to be following him. Um, I commend you because this is, it's a hard time to really share brutal facts that aren't always what people want to be hearing, right?
Yes, in a politically correct world, it's kind of tough to say the things that need to be said sometimes, but sometimes since I carry a taser at work all day, it's easier for me to say than other people.
Right. People are like, okay, maybe I shouldn't mess with this guy. So I have to tell you, as I was preparing for this interview and going through everything that you talk about and you educate parents on, it was making me a little uneasy. And as a parent, because my oldest is 14 and a half, goes all the way down to age 3. But when you push into those tween years and teenagers, it's like, oh my gosh, it could never be my kid. It could never be my kid. My kid wouldn't do this. Like every parent has that hope in their head. And all of our children are innocent and they're they're lovely, but they're human, right? Our children are human and they're bound to make mistakes. And I I did last night. As I was digging deeper, I got uncomfortable because I'm like, but knowledge is power. And so that's why I feel like this interview is so important because I really felt myself personally, selfishly getting uncomfortable, thinking, I don't want to deal with this. I can't go there thinking this could be one of my kiddos. And so, again, I want this conversation just to be simply knowledge is power. We all love our children. We want to see our children safe and succeed, but there is a reality. They're human and they're going to make mistakes. So I feel like there's such a like long list of where we could start. I mean, where do you think we should really start? I mean, so do you think we should start with social media with kids since it's such a prevalent?
Let's do social media.
Yeah,
Um,
let's start there because I feel like that's something that almost all kiddos, I mean, of course, basically by middle school and high school, almost all of them are on social media. I mean, right? The majority?
they are, and if they're not, their friends are on there, so they're going to see it one way or
Right.
the other.
Right. And so I know, and I just want you to be like very blunt. I don't want you to sugarcoat anything because is a Christian mother at that. I bounce back and forth with this. Some of my children are on social media, and they do some good things on there, and they talk about the gospel and Christian things, and they do some funny skits and dances. And then I'm like, what am I doing? Like, why am I allowing this? Like, why am I? And it's like, well, all their other friends are. I almost have that feeling of my child's going to feel depressed and isolated. Should I take that away from them? Even as a mother, I'm battling that. All of the friends have it, all of the friends are on it. And it's like, That's just so wrong. And so I want you to walk me through this. Let's just cover like the basic big no-nos and dangers of social media from what you've seen personally.
Okay. So, the feeling that you're getting, the fear of missing out is real. And then parental peer pressure, because everybody has it. It's hard to say no, especially when kids, hey, I'm the only one that has it. And sometimes they're right? Third, fourth grade, everybody's got a cell phone. And when a kid comes home and says, hey, all my fourth grade class has cell phones, they're right. And then when they get to middle school, high school, it gets even tougher because now some teachers are requiring cell phones because, hey, I'm going to send you a remind notice, or on a team, on a volleyball team or a football team. Hey, we're going to send it out on Snapchat list. Make sure you have Snapchat so that we can tell you where our next football practice is. And it's getting harder and harder. Some teachers are making assignments due on social media. So it's becoming tougher and tougher to remain cell phone free, and especially social media free, when they have all kinds of cell phones. Social media, here's what's happening. It is basically reprogramming kids. And the way it's doing that is just hours and hours and hours a day that kids spend on cell phones. I'll ask a lot of kids. I have lollipops in my office. Hey, show me you spent less than 10 hours of screen time on your phone yesterday. I'll give you a lollipop. And I hardly give out any lollipops. Right. And so some kids, you look at their screen time on their battery use for the day before, and it's 12, 15, 16 hours of screen time. Right. That is a ridiculous amount. And if they're that much screen time, that means somebody else is raising your kids. Right. They are putting their values in. And parents think, well, I talked to them twice last year about values.
You're right.
It's like, hey, that's not going to do it.
No.
Right. That's not going to do it. And I say, hey, do a time. How much time do you spend teaching your kids values versus how much they see on social media values? And they are getting values on social media, right? They get to see how much people think of them, what they're worth, and what's ending up happening is they think they're worth whatever they can spew on social media, and they think they're worth their body parts.
Yes.
Right. And even worse, some people think they are worth how big a victim they can be. Right. Hey, I can be a victim of this. I can be a victim of this. I can be a victim of this. And poor me. And it gets really ugly. And then they think the louder and more they squawk or scream, the more valuable they are. It's like, no, that's not how this works.
Right. It's like this cycle that's being perpetuated of like the squeaky wheel gets the attention, right? And so whether it's in a negative light or positive light, whether it's being complimenting or like you said, searching for pity, however they can get that attention, and I want to piggyback off of what you said. I even know as a 38-year-old woman, I mean, my work is on social media. And so my kids see me on my phone quite a bit throughout the day. And I even know I get caught up, like when I'm looking for content, there's times I'm mindlessly scrolling, not working, and 17 minutes could have passed and it felt like 30 seconds to me. And I look at the time and I'm like, I have just wasted 17 minutes of my life. And I'm an adult and I couldn't even pull myself out of it. I couldn't even self-regulate. So even as adults, and I know so many other parents say this, at nighttime, it's just like we almost can't, everyone's laying in bed and they're just scrolling. It's like we're in this trance. So if we get caught like that, how do we expect our children to self-regulate? They can't.
They can't. And They get so addicted and they just can't put it down. And the fear of missing out happens at 2 a.m. They think that some drama thing is happening, which it is. At school, they think some drama thing is happening, which it is. And so now they have to excuse themselves to go to the bathroom every 15 minutes and look at their social media to make sure nothing's happened in between the last time they saw their social media. And it becomes a big problem at home. It becomes a big problem with their sleep, and it becomes a big problem at school, not only for them, but for all their teachers, all their classmates, the administration, everything.
Wow. So what do you think, and I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm not sure if something's out there or that you know of. Is there like a certain app? Is there like a timer per se that parents can put on their children's phones so something goes off where it's like, oh, you've hit your 2 hours for the day. That's it. Is there
Yes,
something like that?
absolutely. Most of the programs that you use to monitor kids' phones, the free one that comes from Apple, that's already built into the phone, it does have a timer on it. The free one that you can download for Android phones, which is Family Link, it has timers on it as well. The issue is with that is you have to supplement those timers as a parent. You have to make sure you're keeping track. You have to make sure they're not circumventing those timers, which lots of kids know how to circumvent those. But the issue is once you give the phone, addiction starts. Once the addiction starts, kids will do whatever they need to feed their addiction, which means get a hold of secondary phones, borrow, steal, cheat phones to get that addiction, because you're not just going to stop them from the drama that's happening. If they know some dramatic thing is happening in their circle, guess what? They're going to look at it. They're going to figure out a way to go see it because the addiction is there.
It's it's absolutely true. And so what is your suggestion? So because when we look at people's other when we look at someone who has a drug addiction or an alcohol addiction or a porn addiction, what is the answer? To absolutely stay away from it, right? Because someone just can't have just one drink. You know what I mean? Someone just can't have a little taste of something and be, that is how addiction works. So for something like this, what do you think is the best solution?
The best solution is going to be to go free of it, because let's say that you see your kid having a problem and you say, okay, we're going to limit you to 1 hour of screen time a day because you're addicted and we need to control it for you. Well, they get that 1 hour. It's never going to make them happy. In fact, it's probably going to make them less happy than if they had nothing at all, right? Because, hey, I didn't get enough. I didn't get enough. And now the whole day they're thinking of it. Whereas if you go cold turkey, then you got a couple of days of really bad, but you start becoming a new person. And I've seen kids become new people. Some parents have no idea what their kids are like without social media.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
I've personally experienced this with my son who is 12, and he has a phone and he has a PlayStation 5, and he is addicted to Fortnite, which is absolutely terrible. The most arguments in our house happen over me saying, why should a child be shooting people for hours? You know what I mean? Like my son, who's already like, he has some anger issues and he's aggressive. He's all boy. He's a good boy. But I'm like, this isn't good for any child. Like, so why are we letting him do this? And we've even tried different, okay, it's only going to be 2 hours today. And just like you said, it's textbook. It's always like that, for him to get it back. It's, yeah, yeah, yeah. 2 hours will be fine, mom. That's all I want. Just give it back to me. 2 hours is never good enough. It's like pulling teeth to get him off of it. It is anger and it's lashing out, and he's almost unhappier. You're right.
Yes. As a police officer, Fortnite is probably the most 911 calls we get, because, hey, let me finish this game. Let me finish this game. Let me finish this game. Right. And each game's what, 10 minutes or less. And they need to score higher. They need to make it further. They
Yeah.
need to try with this skin. They need to play with this friend. And then when a parent goes in and muscles the game away, well, now they start freaking out and throwing things through windows and breaking things and threatening family with knives. And I go to 911 calls where a family says,
Wow.
we took Fortnite away, or we unplugged the Fortnite, and now our son is breaking things and going nuts.
I,
That's
I,
how bad
I,
that
I
gets.
mean, I believe it, and we have not been at that level. But trust me, I absolutely believe it. And this is, and I'm not going to get off the path because this is just my particular belief. I feel that there's even like spiritual warfare going on there. I feel that like there's a whole different realm coming after our children in games like Fortnite. But it's so addictive. And when I have taken all electronics away from my children for several days at a time, they are different human beings. Yeah, the first few days are like torture. It's almost like I just want to give them back because it's torture, and they become a bit worse before it gets better. But once you get through those first several, it's like, oh my gosh, they're around me so much more. They're not sitting in their rooms. They're like actually communicate. They're talking. Um, Forcing them to go outside and play basketball and ride their bikes and, heaven forbid, color or pick up a book. And And so it really is, it's like they're different human beings when it's taken away. And I'm throwing myself under the bus, and using myself is a poor example, but I feel like it's probably relatable to a lot of parents where we know deep down this is not good for them. I love them. So why am I letting them continue to do it and continue to have it? And that's where we really have to make the tough decisions, because it's going to get harder before it gets better. And you have to be able to muster and push through that, the days of detoxing, basically, right?
It is, and it's absolutely a detox. And you get a lot of parents who, some just don't know better, and it's their babysitter, and they're on survival mode, and they got two jobs, and that's what they can do, and they can leave their kid on social media, and then that's fine. But if you're trying to do the best for your kid, which everybody wants the best for their kid, right? You just sit down and write it down on paper. What are the pros and cons of social media? How much time are our
Right.
kids spending? What else could they be doing in that time, right? What are we robbing them of? They might be a great painter. They might be a great, musician. They might be a great sports of any kind. And
Right.
because social media was there, we never found out.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Talking, shifting into more just with cell phones, and parents being more aware of what's going on. I found it. So again, as I'm prepping for this interview, last night, my husband and I were looking at apps such as Bark. I'm sure, I don't know if you're familiar with
Mhm.
that, like different apps to
Yes.
be able to tell you like what's going on the kids' phones. But here's what infuriated me. Snapchat and TikTok do not allow apps like Bark to um, oversee, to be able
Monitor
to
their
monitor.
application.
Yes, perfect, monitor. And I'm thinking, why should any minor be able to participate on this platform and a parent not be able to see what's happening? That just sent me through the roof. I was like, well, there's our answer right there. Like, why would we let them on something that we cannot monitor?
Yep. Peer pressure is really tough for parents and kids.
Yes.
Right. And Snapchat is one of the worst for me, right? Because it keeps parents out. It has its own hidden vault that is passworded that most parents don't know is there. It
Right.
deletes messages automatically. And from a law enforcement perspective, almost every predator I know uses Snapchat. I can't even subpoena the conversations back and forth between kids. So what conversations they're having with predators, they're gone forever. I can't go back and track. I can't go back and do anything because Snapchat actually deletes them, so they don't even have them for me to go after.
In some system, right? It's there. It's not backed up somewhere. That's just, it's so frightening. And I'm sure you're familiar with Tim Ballard, who's one of the biggest human trafficking advocates out there. He's the founder of Operation Underground Railroad. Um, he I had him on, oh my goodness, it must have been 18 months ago. And when we were talking about social media, because he's talking about all of these adults that, that are human trafficking children. And he said, as a mother, would you let your young child, would you let your 9-year-old go out to a bar alone by themselves or to a club? And I'm like, well, of course not. He's like, then you should never let one of your children alone with an electronic on some type of app or social media behind closed doors without you there. He's like, that's how easy it is to, you know what I mean, to be trafficked, to be approached by some type of predator. It's just maddening. And this was at least 18 months ago. He said it's as easy to order a child as it is to order a pizza. And that is heart-wrenching. And all of these things are happening right beneath our noses. And as parents, I feel like so many of us are sitting ducks, and it's just like, okay, but please, Lord, please not mine. Like, of course, we don't want to see any child suffer, but you just hope, like, don't let it be one of mine. And it's like, no, that doesn't work. Like, we have to take action. We have to set boundaries. We have to make those hard decisions where telling our children, I love you. You're not going to be happy with me. Yeah, I'm going to be the uncool parent. Um, but this is just how it's going to be.
Yes, and getting children into sex trafficking is easy and happens much more often than people think, and then getting them out is super tough. Um, the applications just make it super easy for predators to talk to your kids. And the question I always ask parents is, how much private time do you think your kids need with adult strangers?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Because that's
Yes.
even in the car in the back seat going to somewhere, if they're talking to people on social media, they have private time with strangers. You can't see what they're doing. You can't see what they're sending. It's a horrible thing.
Yes. And my gosh, it just like is a mama bear. It makes my stomach turn. You know, the other thing that you talk about too is children of middle school age. This is where, in today's culture, this is where they begin experimenting with sex. Is that correct? It's typical now at a middle school age?
Yes, seventh grade is where everything changes, right? Sixth graders come into middle school. They're kind of the little fish in a big pond. A lot of middle schools start in sixth grade, and then
Right?
they're exploring their world in sixth grade, and that would be 10, 11. When they hit 12, puberty starts. They start being in social circles. They start being attracted to each other. They start experimenting with different things. Um, in seventh grade at multiple schools, kids are already engaging in full contact intercourse, right? It's not just experimentation, it's intercourse, right? So at the middle school level, by eighth grade, we have a big amount of kids that have already had sex, right? They're already experimenting not only with just straight intercourse, but with, different positions, different activities, group activities. And part of the reason this is happening is they've been on their cell phones for 5, 6 years by now. They've been desensitized by, I call it group grooming, by the world to say that, hey, you're worth your body parts and that sex is okay for everybody. And there's nobody telling them any different. Right. And I ask parents, well, when was the last time you told your kid that they shouldn't be having sex in 12, 13, 14? Well, they just know. No, they don't.
Yeah.
All they see on TV, all they see on everything is that sex is what everybody's talking about. What kind of TV shows do we have that aren't sexually oriented? Modern Family is one of my favorites that's fairly clean, but even there, they have lots of sexual undertones. And now Disney, unfortunately, it feels like they have to go into the sexual realm, which, makes me sad.
Yes.
But this is the world we live in. And if you're not having active conversations about consequences, about these things of sex, 12, 13, 14-year-olds are already having sex, which is a crazy thing, but it is happening.
That just is mind blowing to me. And again, and we can no longer, as parents, say it was just such a different time. I just remember being so naive at those ages. And then I remember getting myself into a very unfortunate situation at age 14, and a lot of things happened that shouldn't have, just because I allowed myself to be where I knew I shouldn't. A good Christian girl making good decisions, but my emotions and hormones take over. And sure, this older guy, he's a senior, you know what I mean? And you just can't process correctly, and then one thing leads to another, and it's almost as if once that innocence and once that purity is taken, a child's, that innocence is gone. You can't get that back. And then it's almost like, well, you've done it once, so you can do it again. Type of, I mean, would you agree that it's like, well, I've already done it once?
Absolutely. And from there, it's easy to go on. And the only thing
Right.
that's going to stop that is parents, right? Have those conversations. And a lot of kids, especially, like you said, Christian, religious, whatever it is, some of those parents don't have the real conversations because it's a little sacred, it's taboo in their house. We have to kind of change society and start having some hard conversations. And I, as a police officer, I'll talk to parents and say, hey, look, have you had this conversation? And they're, well, I don't know where to start or what to do. And so I make some suggestions because it is awkward as a parent to have a real sexual conversation with your kid. And
Sure.
there's parents that think, well, we can have it and we can do it. It's still a little awkward no matter what. So I say, hey, look, I'm happy to have the conversation with your kid with your permission. We have a female counselor that can have the conversation with your kid with your permission. We have, youth leaders. Sometimes they'll have a sexual conversation with, they'll take the boys in one room and the girls, and let's have a sexual conversation, right? Because those conversations just aren't happening enough.
Right. They
And,
aren't.
especially in the religious world, you kind of assume some things. Hey, you're going to be pure and this, that, and the other, but you haven't had the sex talk. It's like, hey, if the creeper gets out of the van and wants you to jump in the van with them, it's easy to say no, right? We got no shoes and hasn't bathed in a week. That's easy to say. But what about when the,
Right.
the hot guy from the high school football team says, hey, why don't you come? Let's have an ice cream, get in my car, I'll take you. Now
Yeah.
we have a different conversation, right? And you have to talk about, hey, when that guy puts his hand on your hand, it's going to feel super nice. You're going to feel like you're in love. You're going to have all kinds of feelings,
Yeah.
especially since everything they've learned through Frozen and whatever other movies they've seen is all these beautiful fairy tale relationships. So now
Yeah.
enter somebody putting their hand on their hand or giving them a kiss on the cheek or the neck. That feels very good to 12, 13, 14. But what comes after is not so good. But we don't have those conversations.
Yes. It's so true. It's so true. And people are so uncomfortable. Now I'm gonna play, I don't even know if the right terminology is, a little devil's advocate. But for parents who, so you're this wonderful, trustworthy um, resource school officer, and I'm sure especially anyone that you would suggest to talk to children would be of sound mind. But so here's the thing that we're starting to see become somewhat prevalent. Okay, is, and again, I was a teacher for 10 years. I love teachers. I will always hold such a high respect for them. But we're seeing certain teachers, certain counselors, certain youth leaders um, talking to children privately and having conversations with them that are against the families, whether it's religious beliefs, moral beliefs, whatever you want to call them, and kind of starting to groom and condition the child differently. Like and I'm sure you know where I'm going with this, right? As far as like sexual identity. And it seems like that is just being pushed so much. And I feel like this coming school year, it is going to be unlike anything we've ever seen, because it's like the snowball that keeps growing. And similarly, like you said earlier in the conversation, where a lot of children are looking to play the victim, even to kind of get that attention, what we're seeing right now all over is anyone who comes out as a different sexual identity. Granted, some of these I don't know what they mean. Honestly, there's so many. I don't know what some of them mean. I'm like, let me Google it. I've never heard of this before. I don't know what it is. That it seems like children are being praised and applauded again for things I don't even know what they mean, and it's becoming a cycle of, and children are seeing, wow, well, that person's getting so much attention, and maybe I'm that. I mean, I remember when Demi Lovato, and I'm not sure if you saw this where you work. I remember when Demi Lovato came out as identifying as they, them. We got so many messages the following week from high school teachers saying that following that announcement, they had a robust amount of their students identifying as they, them that following week after Demi Lovato came out. So again, we're seeing the power of social media are, the people that our children look up to, right? Like, oh, they're an amazing singer, they're an amazing actress, they're an amazing influencer, and they're now this sexual identity, or they're now this gender. And like, and look at all this praise, like maybe I'm that. And so I feel like there's mass confusion. And I feel like a lot of people who have access to children who maybe aren't as sound and morally based as you are, Officer Gomez, that they can really take those reins into a direction that parents would not necessarily want. Does that make sense?
Yes, and it absolutely is happening. At my own school, I have teachers that feel they need to tell kids their sexual preferences, which is strange. Um,
Right.
and some of them, that they come out, and I know there's probably some people listening who's like, I don't know what you're talking about. What kind of, how's there more than, straight, gay, and whatever, but there's pansexual, there's weird other things. But, we have teachers that,
I know.
yeah, that
Right.
feel like they need to push those agendas on people, which is very strange. And we try and stop it at the school, but there's no way we can stop all of that. Disney, again, is doing the same thing. They feel like they need to push, strange things that, I mean, everybody's grown up forever without those things being pushed on kids. We have a new world. And so you have to prepare kids for those conversations. And that is, hey, look, somebody might come and say they like this kind of sexual activity. They shouldn't be doing that, but they are. Now, the thing about that is, at the same time as teachers are doing that, teachers are teaching less and less because they're letting cell phones take over their classrooms. So teaching math, science, everything like that, and even teachers pushing their sexual identities on kids aren't getting that information from teachers because they spend, an hour, maybe 90 minutes a day in a classroom. Of that 90 minutes, I'll bet half of it is on their cell phones just looking at social media because teachers are letting them. They've given up that fight. So now you got, 30 minutes, 40 minutes of actual teaching time, of which, they're going to get some kind of classroom learning. So it leaves very little time for them to push their agendas on kids. And that's a whole nother thing that we are falling behind in education because cell phones are taking over the classrooms. Social media is taking over the classrooms. The Chromebooks that everybody gets at schools are taking over classrooms, right? And those Chromebooks, kids can hack them to get things that they shouldn't be doing. And it becomes a big problem at the school, which we're going to have to catch up with at some point. The kids are way ahead of the parents on that. But you're right. There's some adults who should be trusted adults who are pushing funny business on kids.
Right.
You have to kind of build your tribe of trusted adults. And
Yes.
you can't just let your kids hang out with those trusted adults. There's going to be some adults who aren't on the same agenda as you. That's what you have to train your kids for, right? You're training your kids for battle in the real world. In the real world, there's going to have some people that aren't in their tribe. They've got to learn to deal with them. But as a parent, you have to have those conversations, and you have to have them often. Hey, what are we going to do in this situation? What are we going to do in that situation? What happens when you get in a relationship? Because I tell people, hey, you're going to have thousands of relationships, right? You and your BFF, that's a relationship. You and your science classmate who's opposite sex, that's a relationship. You and your teacher, that's a relationship. But let's talk about healthy relationships and let's talk about unhealthy relationships. Let's talk about controlling versus not controlling. You have to set them up for those things because they're going to happen. A lot of parents would like to say, well, I just don't want anybody teaching my kid that. And I don't want my kid around any parents that are like that or any adults that are like, you can say that, but that's not the reality of the world. Right. You have to set them up for what there is actually going to happen, not what you wish would happen.
Right. And, I want to make 2 points to that. One, I feel like we are going to see, and I know homeschooling is not for everybody. It's just not. It's not feasible. But we are seeing the homeschooling numbers still rise. I think we're going to see that again this year. I think they're only going to continue to rise. I homeschool 4 or 5 of my children. My son, who's 12, wants to be in the public classroom, and he's thriving in there. He's an AB student on his own, and he likes that environment. And right now, until there's other restrictions or mandates that my family doesn't agree with, he'll probably be in there. But I had to pause because as you're talking about social media taking over the classrooms, which I agree, because my son even will bring out his phone when he comes home and he's like, Mom, look at what was happening during social studies. And he shows me this funny video. As in his video, all of the other students are videotaping during instruction. time. And I'm like, why in the world is your phone out, young man? Well, everyone's phone's out, Mom. It was so funny. We're recording, you know what I mean? Anyways, my son had gotten in-school suspension for being rude to a student teacher. Him and a couple other boys were talking out, and he was being rude. And so I was I'm like, okay, yep, you don't do that. I had him write a letter of apology. I'm like, you be respectful. You don't talk out. Good. Serve your in-school suspension, right?
Uh-huh.
And he came home from in-school suspension and he had the best day ever. Couldn't wait to get in-school suspension again because they all played Fortnite all day in in-school suspension. And I didn't even know what to do. I was so upset. And I'm thinking, why are our children, whether it's the parents, whether it's teachers, whether it's whoever, we enable certain behaviors to continue. Oh, you're disrespectful to a student teacher and you're talking out when you shouldn't be. Well, here's a full day of Fortnite. They're like, you know what I mean? And again, we do live in a great area. Of course, no area is perfect. I love a lot of the teachers that I know of in the community, but it's things like this, like what's happening? What is happening? Oh, you're being rude and disrespectful, and you get rewarded in school suspension. So literally, and he didn't get it again, but I could see him already thinking, what can I do to get in there again? I don't have to do work all day and I can go play Fortnite. And I'm like, young man, if you think you're going to try something to get back in there, oh, you're going to be doubly in trouble at home. But literally that was his first thought. And I could see the wheels turning. How do I get back in there? And so it's a wild time. I say this like every day for so many reasons. It's a wild time to be alive. And so basically, I think to summarize that part up, parents have to be, I know I even need to be more diligent. You have to know who your kids are talking to, whether adults, whether children. You have to know what's happening when they're not with you, whether they're at school, whether it's at a sleepover. I mean, when my kids sleep over at a friend's house, I am that annoying person checking in constantly. Who's there? What are you doing? FaceTime me. I want to see. FaceTime me right now. You know what I mean? Checking in with the parents. Because you just don't know. And I know as our children grow up, we can't keep them in bubbles. We can't chain them up and never let them leave. They are going to make mistakes. And it is such a fine line to walk and to do it correctly. But one thing, and I'm sure you share this too, that I personally do with my children, I have the conversations with them telling them, you're going to mess up and you're a good kid, but you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're like, I need mom or dad to get me out. And I'm afraid I'm going to get in trouble. I'm afraid I'm going to get yelled at. And it's like, no, you call us. We work through it. Like, you're going to mess up. And when you do, because our children, I feel like sometimes it's like they don't want to disappoint us. And so they lie. They keep things from us. You know what I mean? And I think it's important that we all reinforce you're not perfect. And when you slip up, you have to let me know so we can try to fix it together,
Yes, absolutely. And I always say, hey, let's keep the mistakes small.
Right. Like, this isn't an invitation to go like,
yep.
Exactly.
So the other thing with that is having those conversations. But the other thing that I stress on to parents is family time. You have to spend some family time. And by that, you have to spend some time in the car. You have to spend some time at activities. And the important part of that is showing your kids how to behave. How do you behave when somebody cuts you off in traffic? How do you behave when somebody says something politically you're not agreeing with? How do you behave when you get the wrong order at McDonald's? How do you behave when you make a mistake, right? These are all things that have to be demonstrated to your kid, not just talked about. Well, if you never spend family time with your kid, there's no way they're going to know what that looks like, right? But those things are so important that you demonstrate these activities when you're going to go boating or going to go horseback riding, or if something doesn't work out, what is your go-to plan? And if it's to scream and yell and throw a fit, guess what your kids are going to do? The same exact things, right? And we get that at the school where, we get a kid who just blows up in class and we call the parents in for a parent meeting, and here comes the parent and blows up in our meeting. I'm like, okay, well, I see exactly where that came from. But if you don't spend any family time with your kids, you never demonstrate that, and there's no way for them to get the appropriate values. And then as a police officer, now I get to deal with 20, 30, 40-year-olds who never learned how to resolve social conflict, who never learned those things. And they've been coddled by their parents so much. Now here comes a police officer who, hey, you're not going to talk me out of whatever action I've decided on. And there's going to be consequences. And they can't understand, oh, here's somebody making me do something I don't want to do. It's so important for people to spend family time. Whatever it is, hikes, activities, hobbies, sports, those things are super important. Not so much for the activity, is great. Outdoors is great. Not social media time is great. The most important part of that is teaching your kids how to react to things, demonstrating to them how they should be to everybody. How should we treat somebody? How should we respect people? Even the person at McDonald's that messes up your order, let's treat them with respect. Let's give them an opportunity to fix this. Those are things that are important to teach to kids. And if you never spend any time with them, they're going to learn it from social media.
Yes. It's so, oh my gosh. And I feel like God has been humbling me a lot over the last 24 hours, but I'm thinking, oh my gosh, mom's not great in traffic. I have a little road rage. I'm also a big foodie. I always treat people with respect, but there's times like it's so true. Even these little examples are really big examples where I always teach my children. There are kids starving. Like I hate when my kids complain, when there's 5 of them, you can't really make all of them happy at once. Well, I don't want to go here, or I don't want this for dinner. I'm like, there are children starving. You're going to eat this. But there's been times where literally throwing myself under the bus again, where my fries weren't in the bag or my got the wrong sandwich. And I've, thrown a little fit, not to the person, but in front of my children. And it's like, how can I expect them to act kindly and responsibly? Mom, there's children starving. It's okay. You know what I mean? It's so true. It has to be our actions. Our actions speak so much louder than words. And you were just hitting the nail on the head so incredibly. And the other thing I wanted to say too is family time is just so imperative. It's so imperative. But I even know for people like myself who have 5 children, my children just, they yearn for one-on-one time with me. And even if it's a short 15-minute walk, like they love, or a bike ride, my kids love having me one-on-one on a bike ride. Or if it's like running to the grocery store, like, Mom, just take me. I just know they thrive off that too. Parents who have multiple children, like my children individually are different human beings than they are within the entire family unit. So I feel like family time is so absolutely crucial. And then it's like that one-on-one time, they get to be their own person and they get to be heard. And I just know that's something that I try to work on so much too. They really need me one-on-one as well. And so, as I'm looking at our list here, and as we begin to wrap, what do you think is one of them? I mean, I know you talk, and I'm going to link your page below after we end. Everybody needs to follow Officer Gomez. I mean, he talks about bullying, vaping, screen time, nude photos, children experimenting with sex as early as middle school. What do you think, in closing, would you share to parents? Like, if I'm a big person, I love call to action. Like, okay, this was great. These last 45 minutes were great, but now I need to do something. Like, I'm someone who physically, you need to tell me to go do it. What do you think that would be? There's so many things, but if you were to tell parents right now, the best first step for you to do next, what do you think that would be?
So 2 things I always recommend for let's detox and start a direction. Number 1, sit down as a family, write down the itch list, which is the same thing as a bucket list. What things would we like to do over the next year? What are some activities? What are those things we would like to accomplish? Right? That puts it down on paper. You can see what's going on. The second thing, come up with a list of family values, print it out, put it on the wall. Let's talk about those weeklies. Are we abiding by our family values and who we are? One of the big things I see in teens is they don't know what they're worth. This came across to me a couple years ago. I had a young lady who I knew very well, dating age. She's probably 16, and she came to my office crying that guys would date her for 3 or 4 weeks and then dump her. And I asked her, I said, what are you worth to you? And she says, well, I don't know what that question means. I'm like, okay, I have a pet at home. What can you do better than my pet? Well, I don't know. I'm like, okay, well, let's give you an assignment. Go home at the age of 20, after the age of 25, when you get married, what things would you like in your husband? And so, she comes back the next day with a laundry list of things she wanted from her husband. I'm like, okay, so what kind of things are you going to offer for that? Why would somebody of that caliber want you? And then she goes, oh, and then she could start working on a list of values that she wanted to be. Right. And I always tell people, twos don't marry tens and tens don't marry twos. It's oversimplified for the kids, but you have to build yourself up if that's what you want. But most kids have no idea what their value is other than the likes they get on Facebook or the videos that they share on TikTok or the Snapchat streaks that they have. They don't know what they're worth more than that. As a family, you need to start building some self-worth into kids, because ultimately that is going to be what's going to keep them on the right path. Hey, I'm worth more than that to my family. If you're religious, I'm worth more than that to God. I'm worth more than that to myself. Kids have to know what they're worth. And increasing worth in a kid, not that hard, but you got to work on it. Learn a language, learn music, learn how to write, learn how to cook, start increasing yourself. Even as simple as homework. We take in high-risk teens, and one of the quickest ways we can inject self-worth at home is getting their homework done. Once a kid can get their homework done, now they feel like they're in control of their life. They feel like they've accomplished something. Self-worth is so important, because if you don't have it, the first internet person you meet that says a couple kind words and says they feel sorry for you or they understand your life and nobody else does, well, then you fall for that person without thinking, hey, why is a 50-year-old talking to a 12-year-old girl is not correct. Right. Self-worth is probably one of the most important things you can teach kids. Hey, you are worth this, that, and the other. That way somebody who doesn't have those values can't just come in to their bubble and take over.
Yes. Wow. That was tremendous. And I love all the suggestions you give too, and again, as a former teacher, as a writer, as a blogger, there's something so significant about writing it down on paper. It's tangible. You're seeing it. You're reading it. It's just not like floating through your head. I have to write everything down. And it makes me feel more organized. And it's like, okay, it's on paper now. And so I love that. I love those suggestions. What you just said for families to do. I love what you do with your students. I mean, truly, we need more of you. You're like a diamond in the rough. And I wish every school could have an Officer Gomez until we can find out how to duplicate you.
Well, and what I've found is that it may not be Officer Gomez at every school, but lots of communities have different versions of me, right? It might be the bus driver person, a version of me. It might be the principal version of me. It might be, right? And they're all over the place. And I always tell people, hey, every kid needs a champion in their life. Sometimes that champion should be at home, but a lot of the kids don't have a champion at home. Right. So the next best person is their teacher, the bus driver, the lunch lady, the crossing guard, the neighbor, the grocery store person. These can all be champion for kids, and a lot of times they are. But every kid needs a champion. And the more a kid seems to be misbehaving and what people would call a punk, the more they need a champion. The more they need somebody to reach out and say, hey, let me pay attention to you. Let me help you. And we'd rather that be good people and not all the social media weirdos that are going to reach out and try and be that person fake-wise to get into your family.
Yes. Oh, amen to that. Well, this was absolutely amazing. I thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And I feel like even maybe we need to bring you back on like quarterly talk about the latest happenings and, surviving the school year and what to do. Because it seems like we're always up against something. And as hard as it is to adult in these times, we have to think, if it's hard for us, how are our children? It's some days I feel like I'm drowning on social media dealing with people. So how are our children, faring through all of that? And so it's just such great perspective. So Officer Gomez, thank you so much for coming on. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, the best place for people to reach you is through your Facebook page?
It is through my Facebook page. That is what I pay attention to the most. I actually live up in the mountains where I get spotty cell service and I have weird, Wi-Fi reception. So Facebook saves the messages. I can get to them when I need.
Yeah.
And that's where I put all the latest and greatest information. You can ask questions, but a lot of times, I'll post something and half the learning is from the comments, right? You get to see what other people post, good and bad. You get to see
Absolutely.
some crazy comments from parents that, wow, you're not setting a very good example, but that's learning as well, right? You can learn from everything.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I will link your page below. Everybody, I don't care where you live, you need to follow him. What he shares is mind blowing. He shares the good, the bad, and everything in between. So, Officer Gomez, thank you so much for coming.
You're very welcome, and I would be happy to come on again when you need me.
I'm going to hold you to it.
Okay.